How you doing?
All right, good to see you.
And you? It's been a little while, but yeah, good to see you, mate.
It's been about a decade.
It probably has, yeah. The time just evaporates, doesn't it?
It's, about a decade ago, you released A Different World, and I don't know if you were playing gigs with your lineup of Badfinger, but you were certainly
We
in
were.
that sort of space.
Yeah, we were. We did a couple of biggish theatre tours, and we did a lot of sort of smaller clubs. Yeah. We were quite active then. Yeah.
And at the time, it was about 40 years since Headfirst, and now it's 50.
It's unbelievable, isn't it, really? Just as a little postscript, you may know, or you may not know, so I'm just telling you just in case, that I did get a demo version of this Ed First album out in near 2000.
The Snapper release.
That's right. I was central to getting that out of frustration, really, and I thought this album will never see the light of day. There's no multi-tracks. That I can do is just put this two-track mix by the engineer. So that was the sort of background to the final denouement that we see ourselves with today.
Yeah, I was listening to some of those two-track mixes, and I know that over the years there's been a few tracks off those sessions that got sneaked onto Badfinger compilations, but then there was that bigger set. But I was comparing the Snap release from about 25 years ago to this new mix of Head First, and the Snapper one's got it's a little bit muddier, whereas the quality of the music is part of that lineage of great
Yeah,
Badfinger albums, but the sound now truly matches those great albums.
absolutely. That was the biggest thing that I wanted to, beside the overall mix, of course, but I did want to improve that sound quality. The Snapper album, although I was central to getting the business side done, I had nothing to do with that production, and I think it was pretty poor, really. I think I think it was just rushed through. They didn't spend enough time with it, really. But this time round, I took full control of it, and between myself and my partner Andy Nixon, we mixed and mastered it as well. Not often artists do that, but we decided to take full control. And yeah, I think that, yeah, I'm happy with the result. I think it's so much better sonically, as you say.
And the difference is that the master tapes for those sessions were discovered.
Yes, indeed. So for years and years and years, ever since we'd made that album in '74, I'd always been told, it was my understanding from people, that those tapes were missing, maybe stolen, certainly not with Warner's. No one could find them. I asked Warner's directly over many years. I asked other people. Yeah, it was unbelievable. So it got a bit of a thing with me over many years. It wasn't something that kind of went away. It was a constant frustration. But then ultimately, I found, well, I heard one or two kind of whisperings. I realized that these things must be around. I noticed one or two remixes on YouTube, and that led me to believe, wait a minute, if someone has remixed it, or odd tracks here and there, they've had access to it. These things must be around. So what transpired was that I had to enter a very lengthy legal argument with Warner's. First of all, telling them that I believed that they did have the tapes, and secondly, even bigger, that they didn't actually own the tapes, even though they'd said for years and years and years and years that they did. So that was a lot to overcome. It took me about 7, 8 months of wrangling with a lawyer in America. But hey, I got there.
And we'll be going into the album hopefully in quite a bit of depth shortly, but I just wanted to talk about the context and run up to that LP because I think that's important to put it in context.
Yeah.
And I know that with your lineup of Badfinger, you played Just a Chance, which is from Wish You Were Here, which was the previous Badfinger album that was recorded not that long before. But actually, there was quite a lot of things happening in the world of Badfinger in terms of lineup changes, tours, and I think the. I'll just start. It's quite complicated here. So,
there's a lot to discuss. Yeah.
I think in 1974, you've been in quite a few bands, and the most recent one was Ross, but you'd quit that band, but you didn't quit the band for Badfinger.
No, that's accurate. I quit the band. The band were actually doing very well. We were managed by the Robert Stigwood organisation, and he'd put us on a Clapton tour in the States, and we were recording in the States. So the band was actually been quite successful. But I wasn't happy in there, and I did what now I look at as a slightly silly thing. It wasn't a sensible move, but I left the band while I was in America. I decided I was going to leave, and I left, and I came back and didn't have anything. So not smart, really, but I was working very much from my gut and what I felt. I just couldn't do what I was doing anymore, and I needed to do something else. And it was just serendipity, really, that I got this message saying, would you like to audition for a band in London? Didn't state who the band was, but it was very lucky, very fortunate, that timing.
So around that time, so Badfinger, you'll have to correct me again, had just recorded Wish You Were Here, but Pete Ham at that point was looking to get out of the group.
Well, they'd certainly done the album not long before, and expected it to be promoted, and that things would just keep moving forward naturally. But what actually happened was that there was an argument started, a legal argument, between our management, Badfinger Enterprises, who were based in the States, and the record company, Warner's. And this kind of got worse and worse, this argument, to the point where it was affecting the band morale, really. And Pete, the band members were all in disarray about it, not knowing, do we trust this management? What do we do? It seems promotion isn't happening with this album properly. We realised there was a bit of a standstill. And I think the defining thing was that Pete left the band after a sort of internal argument with the rest of the guys. Yeah, he left. It wasn't the smartest move for him either, at the time. But he did go. He quickly returned, but by that time the apple cart had been upset, if you know what I mean. So, yeah.
So you'd been recruited to fill a certain role in the group that Pete momentarily had left, but then you did go on tour post Wish You Were Here, and you were a 5-piece, so that included at the time Pete, Tommy, Mike, yourself, and Joey.
That's right, exactly that. Yeah. So when I was brought in, I was told you'll be replacing Pete. He's left, and I was obviously I didn't know all this background at that particular point in time. Right, okay. So we rehearsed, and then one day, not too long after I joined, Pete came back, and he walked in the rehearsal room where we were playing, said it sounded great, and he'd thought again, and he'd like to return to the band. So that left me in a slightly weird position, thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm replacing this guy. If he's coming back, but happily there was no need to worry. They said, look, it's sounding great with keyboards. They'd never had keyboards before as a permanent instrument. It was always something that was overdubbed for the most part on record. But by bringing in a 5th member, of course, they had the opportunity to have keyboards there and another harmony, So they said, look, we're delighted the way it all sounds. So Pete returned, and we did a tour together.
And you were supporting, was it Man?
That's right, yeah. It was kind of like an equal billing thing, really, but we thought Yeah, there was no big. I mean, there were no egos or arguments about it. But yeah, we said, yeah, no, you know, you've got the tour. It's an existing thing. The tour was going to go on anyway, and the agent said, look, I can fit you on the tour, kind of thing. We said, yeah, that's great. That'd be a great way of, you know, sort of returning to the live scene in England. So yeah, we did that.
And where was Badfinger standing? Because now, I'm not disparaging Man whatsoever, because absolutely fantastic band and fantastic legacy.
Yeah.
But Badfinger as a group are one of the great bands. Obviously, awful circumstances around it, but
Mhm.
at the time, you would think that Badfinger should have guaranteed hit singles, albums, should be top tours galore, but that was not the case despite the music being amazing.
Yeah, well, I agree with all that. Um, I think a fundamental mistake had been made a couple of years before I joined to concentrate on the American market. So instead of carrying on with British tours and so on, UK tours, it was decided, no, we'll put all the energies into going to the States. Well, that's all very well, and it was a big market, but I think it's plain now in retrospect that it was a huge mistake to leave the UK audience behind. So over those intervening years, up to 74, for the previous couple of years, there hadn't been a lot of activity here with the band. So yeah, so it wasn't surprising to us. That's why when the promoter said, look, I've got an existing tour already booked in with Man, would you like to go on it? We were the last ones to say, well, shouldn't we be having top billing or whatever? It was like, no, we're delighted to be on it. This is a great way to kind of return. And of course, it was the Welsh kind of mafia, you know, all the musicians, everyone knew each other. So it was a good vibe. But you're right. I mean, yeah, Man had a kind of massive following here in the kind of, shall we say, the progressive rock scene, but Badfinger there hadn't been much profile for a while. So, but despite all that, we went down great. Yeah, got very happy memories of the tour, and we did well.
And I know that groups at the time released quite a number of albums at least once a year, sometimes more than that. But at the same time, if an album didn't have as much success as it should do, like Wish You Were Here, you would think that there would be space to maybe promote another album, maybe devote your time in the UK to getting onto Radio 1, rather than almost wiping the slate clean and going straight onto another record.
I agree. I mean, it was a big, big mistake. And by the way, the record successes in America, even though this American management had created a fantastic sort of money deal, which was supposed to benefit the group as well as the management, and didn't. But the actual record sales, even in America, they weren't that great considering the amount of advances that were being paid out. So this was one of the reasons initially why Warners were getting itchy feet anyway, despite what ultimately happened with the management taking money out of the account. But Warners were already getting a bit itchy, well, we're paying out all this money and we haven't had a hit for a while. So, yeah, it was an awkward thing, really. Awkward situation.
In terms of the States, I'm looking at this retrospectively, so it's always easier to do so. States is a bit of a gamble in the sense that it's so big with different markets, East Coast, West Coast, Mid America, that it could go fantastically and you could hit the big time, but it could also swallow you up.
True enough. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, Badfinger were lucky in a sense that the band always had that kind of Beatles mates tag, you know what I mean, from the same stable as. So that helped tremendously in kind of keeping the profile of the band up in America. But yeah, of course, and that's the business, isn't it? That you can be up 1 minute and down the next. So the crunch thing, I suppose, to point out here is that although we did the tour, that was successful and so on, the management decided that even though this Wish You Were Here album had only just been done, they heard about the rumblings from Warner's about, well, maybe we should renegotiate this deal because we're spending an awful lot of money out and the band hasn't had a hit for a while, blah, blah, blah. The management decided to take a big chunk of money out of an escrow account. That's a third-party goodwill account that the record company kind of puts money into. The management bypassed all the usual channels and basically kind of took money out of this account. Well, that was it. Big explosion. That gave the record company, Warner's, every reason and more to say, aha, wait a minute now, you can't be doing that. So that was really the ultimate.
Was that the publishing money for Without You that had been a hit for Nielsen a few years earlier, or is it broader?
No, completely different set of money. It was, the deal was structured, as most deals were then, that when the band delivered their next product, sort of thing, every 6 months or whenever it was going to be, that it was good faith agreement that the management would deliver the tapes, and at that point they could then get out the money that was in the escrow account under the deal that was all agreed.
So like an advance.
An advance, exactly that. But what Stan Polliard, the manager, did was he rushed us after that tour. He rushed us into the studio and said, "Quick, make another album, because I want I want the next advance." It was like, but wait a minute, Stan, the band's only just made an album and we're waiting for it to be promoted. It was like, no, I want the next advance. So just do anything. Doesn't matter what it is. I've booked the time in Apple. Go in and do this album. So it was so naive in a way of them to think they could get away with that. But that's what they did. So we went in, did this album. He handed, I don't know, I mean, there was probably just a day or two between it, but he took the he took the advance before they'd agreed to take the album. You know what I mean? Bad news.
So it wasn't purely Warner's, and I know that you weren't around at the time, but the group had moved from Apple to Warner's. I assume there was a better offer, but it wasn't necessarily the pressure from Warner's to get an album. Actually, it was the management trying to get more money off the label.
Exactly that. I mean, to just for clarity, there was an agreement that a new album would be delivered at a mutually acceptable time, but considering that they Wish You Were Here was only just, it had only just been released, really, a few months. It was an inappropriate time to try and squeeze more money out of them. But Stan decided to push his luck. And of course, that didn't work for any of us, particularly us, the band. Because once those lawsuits started, it encapsulated not only an action against the management themselves, but against Badfinger Enterprises. And that entity included every member of the band as well as the management.
So to backtrack, he had Pete coming and going, but he was still with you post-tour. Mm-hmm. You were a 5-piece, but yes. Before you started recording the new album, Joey left.
Yeah, what a time it was. I mean, when you think back now, it's crazy. We finished the tour. Everything had gone swimmingly and everyone seemed happy. But there was still this personal argument. The reason that Pete had left in the first place, that kind of animosity, if you want, that hadn't really completely gone away. So when we finished, Joe just said, "Well, look, I'm leaving anyway." We were like, "Well, no, don't do that, But he was absolutely, his mind was made up.
Was he one? I know that in relation to this album, we can come to it. There's a fantastic, truly band effort where you were all writing the material.
Mm-hmm.
But did Joey, do you recall the main factor for him leaving the group because of all the management financial issues, or was there a creative difference?
I don't think there was really a creative difference. It was more to do with, it was ultimately, I suppose, because of that management and business situation. Pete particularly was saying, look, we're in a hell of a state here, let's not rock the boat. And Joey, and particularly Joey's wife at the time, had sort of decided, look, kind of like, we're better managing the band than the manager it would be. And yeah, it was a complicated social situation, but it was primarily because of that, the bad business stuff. Yeah, it wasn't anything to do with the fact that we couldn't work together musically. No.
Was the material that you were bringing out, or certainly some of the members, older material, or was it freshly composed?
It was all pretty much freshly composed. I mean, we didn't have much notice before going into the studio. We were just told, as I indicated earlier, that time's been booked. I think it was 11 days at that
Which is
point.
nothing.
People spend that time getting getting a drum sound, in those days.
Ken Scott and Supertramp.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we kind of decided. I mean, Pete must have had a grillion songs in his back pocket, but he introduced the Lay Me Down track. That was a very recent thing. His other one was recent. In fact, we all said, let's not kind of do old tracks. Let's try and create something as fresh as we possibly can. And the guys were they were lovely with me. I held no power or sway, but they worked very democratically. We want you to inject a bit of rock into it. That's what we're looking for. So I was encouraged to co-write and so on and so forth. So that was a really fulfilling thing, for me. And we just had to be workmanlike about it and just get down to it, because Joe had gone. We knew the business was in disarray. We didn't even really know why we were in the studio. It was like, what the hell's happening here? But we just got on with it and kind of made the best job we could of it.
And who are you working with in terms of engineers, producers?
Well, we were working with Phil McDonald, a Beatles engineer. He was great. He was right on the button. Well, he'd been doing it a while, hadn't he? So everything was great with him. The management had sent two guys over who had produced Kiss before, Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise. We had never met them before, when we weren't asked whether we approved them or wanted them, but they were sent anyway. They were all stopping in I think it was the Dorchester around the corner, Good for them, eh? And they came to the sessions, but to be fair to them, they couldn't offer much because we had a limited time and we hadn't fully arranged the tracks. It isn't like they were all rehearsed before coming into the studio like most bands would do. We just didn't have the luxury of that time. So we just kind of worked on it ourselves. They offered very little advice. As I said, to try and be fair to them, what advice could they? They hadn't heard the material before. They only just got there. We'd only just met them. And we were still working on all the stuff ourselves, finishing off the writing and arrangements. So we more or less kind of did it ourselves, really. Yeah.
So they didn't really add any value. And that's, I guess, for the better, because I think by 1974, certain production styles, whether it's bass, where it's a bit sort of unnecessarily funky or something, can date quite badly. But this sounds like it could have been recorded in 1970, which is no bad thing for me.
Well, of course, remember that they didn't, although they did kind of do a mix that was sent to the record company to get the advance, but the record company, Warner's, rejected that immediately. And their mix never saw the light of day. It was never heard by anyone outside Warner's. So it was only once I got the master tapes, about 18 months ago now, something like that, that I could me and my partner, as I said before, Andy, we could take a fresh look at it. And my central kind of tenet about it all was it's got to sound in context. It's got to sound like part of that whole kind of, it's got to sound of the time, and it's got to fit in sound wise. It, as you just sort of indicated there, no fancy productions with some new high-end processors. We kept it sort of simple, but made it as effective as we could. And I think if I say so myself, I think we kind of succeeded. So it does sound of the time, even though it was made 50 years. I've said before to someone, it's the oldest, newest album around,
Yeah, because you released your mix of Lay Me Down, the fantastic Pete track, and it feels like a great lost Badfinger single.
Yeah, well, it would have, it would have been if only, we could have held it all together and it would have come out as it should have done at that time. Who knows where we would have gone from there? I personally think we had a lot more to give and a lot more to do. And it is sad, really, that that potential was never realised. But it does sound of the time, doesn't it? You can imagine it back then,
Yeah, because Paul McCartney, the stuff that he was recording in that period with Wings, it sits very well against that.
Yeah.
But in some of the songs that on that record, Rock and Roll Contract, Hey Mr. Manager, that undercurrent of those financial and management issues were coming through.
Oh, very much so. For the bulk of that recording, I stopped at Tommy's because my home was in Coventry. I'd not by this time moved from Coventry. I was still in Coventry. So I stopped with him, and he was writing all these sort of dark lyrics, and because all that was being written, as that of that time. And he kind of dressed it up in these kind of chirpy pop song kind of style, the Hey Mr. Manager thing. It sounds quite chirpy and up and poppy, but yeah, the lyrics said it all, really. It was pretty direct and on the nose. I can remember Tommy feeling a bit apprehensive when we actually handed the tapes over to Polly's guys on the last day. I remember Tom saying, "Look, tell Stan it's nothing personal. It's art, So I think he was kind of hedging his bets at the time, thinking, "Did I go too far here?" But of course, as it panned out, there was no need to worry about all that because it was all over anyway by that time.
And at that point, we discussed Pete. Would you think Tom was more driven to continue the group at that initial period for the album? Or was Pete fully back in?
Oh, Pete was fully back in. Yeah, I would say we pretty even effort on all sides. There was no one band leader. Everyone led their own song and kind of put the finishing touches to it. But no, we were all equally up and optimistic at the time, despite Joey going, which we were down about. We didn't want him. No one wanted him to go. Not Pete didn't want him to go, But despite that and these kind of murmurings of, wait a minute, what's happening with the management and money and blah, blah, because the money stopped, So we were in a bad place psychologically, but in terms of us working, the working atmosphere in the studio was actually really good. And yeah, I would say it was a 4-man equal kind of partnership.
And there's not that many bands that have got 4 or 5 at certain points great songwriters, but even with Mike Gibbons, the drummer, and there's Back Again, for example.
Yeah,
it's just exceptional songwriting. So you've got songs coming in from all different avenues.
Yeah, that was the big underlying strength of the group, I think, to have 4 people who could sing and write and play, multi-instrumentalists as well, all together in one band. That's you don't find that too often. So, as I said, there was so much more to do, really. Yeah.
Were you on a synthesizer on Back Again? Is that you I can hear?
It is, yeah. I brought this. I had a personal. It was my own little synth. Since had only just started coming out and so on and so forth. And I had a little ARP Odyssey, it was called, and it was only about 2 octaves. It was about like so big, that wide, and you could only play one note at a time, and it cost an arm and a leg. I mean, it was really expensive. But I bought that and I took that down to the sessions and did any kind of arrangements with it, as I say, there and then while we were in the studio. But yeah, it kind of worked out all right, I thought. Yeah.
And how far along was the artwork for the album? I know that we've got this very striking lion on it, but what was the thinking at the time? The picture for the artwork already been chosen, or was that something after?
No, the idea was there. Tommy Evans had this idea of it was like a little the idea of the old circus where the circus master is opening the lion's mouth and dares people to put their head in, and Tommy thought that was a good analogy to the position we were in. We were dicing with death really in this situation with the management. Yeah, they were very, very powerful and stuff, but were we safe? Were we going to get out of it? So Tom had that original ideas, that concept. There was efforts made, but not at the time. No, all those things were late. I mean, the first thing that happened was once that album had been recorded, it was given to Warner's, who rejected it. So you can imagine there'd been no liner notes, no artwork, no nothing really. And it was already kind of cut in its prime, with Warner saying, "We don't want it, No, we don't want Badfinger either. We don't want your crooked management. We don't want this, that, and the other." So, yeah. So the artwork that is currently on there, that was something that was sourced later, well after Pete and Tom's deaths.
And we touched on it earlier, but as a really new member of the group, you were fully involved in the writing with some amazing songwriters, two of the greatest songwriters, Tom and Pete, in the group. You're collaborating. There's Moonshine, which is a collective effort.
That's right.
It's quite remarkable that you come in and you are a critical, equal unit in that group.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny match. I think it was a good match as it happens, but it was a lucky match in a sense, because I think if you look back to the previous album that they'd just done, Wish You Were Here, they were already starting to move into kind of more progressive arrangement type stuff. And on some tracks there was synth and stuff like that, which was a big change from all the albums before that, which were a little more simplistic. I mean, I think they'd reached a new high with Wish You Were Here. So I'd come from this background of progressive rock, more kind of like a heavier thing, and I could bring all that synth side as well as the normal kind of piano and organ thing. I also had this thing about pushing the boundaries of synths. I remember when I did the audition, for instance, I brought that little ARP Odyssey, and the guys were quite surprised by it, but given the time it was, but I was bending notes like a la guitar kind of licks and harmonizing with what Joey was doing and that sort of thing. So I think it was a lucky match that I came from this progressive. They were from a poppy background, get more progressive, and I was sort of from this very progressive rock background, and I was very happy, very, very happy to get a bit more commercial and not be so, out on a limb, sort of esoteric. So I think it was a good vibe and a good match. Worked well.
And the circumstances, the domino, the chain of events, being pushed into recording the album being refused, Pete, sadly passing, and then the financial issues, and then Apple deleting the records. Over the space of a year or two, it was almost like Badfinger didn't exist in a way. It's just the most, out of any group in the history of music, It must be the most unfortunate series of events. And then obviously with Tommy later, it's just the most awful, appalling story, but at the same time, the music is beautiful, including this record.
Yeah, I think that's what we all have to concentrate on is the legacy of the music. All the albums were, terrific writing, great performances, and all that. But that period was extraordinarily difficult. I mean, it was nervous breakdown time, really, for all of us to some degree. Pete succumbed first. Of course, he had the pressures of like social pressures, if you want, that he'd just taken a mortgage out for the first time in his life. He wasn't living in a bed sit. He just moved into a house and found he couldn't pay for it. He had a family on the way. So it got to him quicker than the rest of us, but we were all so depressed. The money was cut off and so on. Yeah, it really is a doomy, gloomy, unusually, angsty ride for everyone. It was just all, I can't really put it into words. It was so awful. And then, as you indicate there, later, Tommy and I kind of carried on ourselves for some years, kept going back to the States and gigging with Mike as well. But ultimately, his limit was reached as well. So I went through both of those deaths. Yeah, it was just the worst. It's never gone away. That's the only way I can put it. It will never go away. It was too much to take in. And not just for me, of course, but the families and so on and so forth. When we're in touch, we still talk about it to this day, how unbelievable and surreal it was. Yeah, sad, really. But the music's there. Yeah.
Where do you think you guys would have gone over the next 20 years? I'm sure you'll have all had solo projects, but the amount of talent in the group that was still flooding out for Head First could have sustained you guys in a different management structure and record company structure for many years.
I think there's several if onlys. If only the management had not broken the agreement by taking the money. If only Warner Brothers had not said, right, well, we're just suing you all, never mind just the manager, who we know is at fault. And they told us that on the phone. We know it's not you guys, but you're part of a legal entity, If only they'd have just paid the money for that album. If only we could have found help from other people. We went to various managements after recording that album, trying to get help to get out, and people were interested, but not interested in actually doing the legwork of getting us out. They'd say, come back when you're out, I think we could have achieved so much, because despite the fact that Joe had gone, which was a sad thing and was not what anyone wanted, I think Head First is testament to the fact that we could, we had the goods to carry on. We were all pretty prolific with our writing, and we got on great. That's not always usually in a group, but we all got on great. I think we would have gone from strength to strength. I don't think it would have been it was just the fact that Warner's cut that whole legacy of that, the last album before, which was a great album, Wish You Were Here, then stopped Head First. I mean, yeah. It's too bad. It really is too bad. But, I'm absolutely proud as punch and pleased that Head First has come out, because that whole thing represented a deep injustice to me. And I thought, that album's just got to see the light of day. But how can it, because the multi-tracks are missing. But ultimately, I think that's what I now cling to. It's like, finally, 50 years to the day, we got the album out.
And so everyone can go to badfingeruk.com and there is various, the vinyl, the CD, the digital version of Head First on there.
That's right, or Amazon, but you'll get a better deal. Actually, money-wise, people get a better if you buy it directly from us. People pay less, so come to us, folks. But yeah, we've still got stock. We're on I think it's our third pressing now, so we're doing well. We're doing well.
There's one track that seemed to symbolise some of what we've been discussing today, and it's your track, I Won't Forget You.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me about that? Because, again, that's just a great track of yours.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's never had a proper release, never had an official release. But it was a song that I wrote for Pete after Pete died. A few months went by and I was in such sort of angst and depression and stuff. And it kind of came out quite relatively quickly, that song. I now find it equally appropriate to Tommy's situation that happened subsequently. I mean, the irony is, of course, that I was playing that song for Pete with Tommy for many years. We used to do it live, as it happens, he loved that song. So, but it's equally kind of apropos to him as well. But yeah, it's a good little tune. Shame it never really saw the light of day, Maybe I should think about, I don't know. But thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So we opened talking about going back a decade with In a Different World, which actually, again, very much fit the lineage of Badfinger. We had COVID, you had some health difficulties, but now with Head First, there's potentially a really good opportunity to get yourself out there. We've had Joey's sad passing as well.
Yeah,
other than Ron, you are kind of carrying that Badfinger legacy, and it's a story and it's music that deserves to be heard.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't currently got anything lined up, but we have been talking about it a lot since the release of Head First. To be perfectly honest, I wanted to just see how Head First would do. Was it going to sell 10 copies? Or was it going to sell 10,000 copies? You know what I mean? It's very difficult to know. Quite a risk, really, to take on. But anyway, it's done really well so far. So, yeah, I'd like to think that I will do some live gigs again to promote it. And I think there is well, as we just sort of proved here, there's a lot for fans to get their teeth into. And many people don't know this story, of course. They know about Pete and Tom's passing, they know about the hits and blah, blah, blah. But this just in itself, I mean, it's something to celebrate, really. So, yeah, I ought to get my skates on and do some gigs, really.
I've discussed I Won't Forget You, but there's more tracks that deserve a wider airing.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. Yeah, there's tracks. Yeah, I mean, with Y&T got involved. That's an American, US record company. They were sort of very helpful in getting this album out, and they have started putting a lot of like older demos by Pete and Tommy out, which have also sold well. So I think Badfinger as a brand is very fortunate to still have a following. And I believe that there are still thousands of fans worldwide out there. Is there enough of a demand in one area to get gigs? I'd like to think so. Whether it's here or somewhere else, I'd like to think so. So yeah, it's definitely on my mind. I'd definitely like to do more gigs. Yeah.
Well, Bob, it's been a privilege to talk to you. I've loved hearing the new non-muddy version of Head First.
Yeah.
And a brilliant record. I hope we hear more from you live and in terms of other archive releases. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for your support, mate. Very grateful.